You're listening to What's Wrong With This Picture? Freaky Films and Why We Frickin' Love Them. Hi, I'm Lindsay McCullough.
And I'm Gary Mulholland. And in each episode of What's Wrong With This Picture, we'll be looking at a movie we think is weird and wonderful. We sometimes do include the endings where it's key to what the film is, so please be prepared for that. So anyway, buckle up and join us on a journey to dangerous cities, suburbia, and other fantasy worlds. It's going to be a wild ride. Today's episode is about The Conversation. This is an American thriller which was released in 1974. It was written, produced and directed by Francis Ford Coppola. It stars Gene Hackman as Harry Caul, Frederick Forrest as Mark, Cindy Williams as Anne, John Cazale as Stan Ross, Terry Garr as Amy Fredericks, Robert Duvall as the director, and Harrison Ford as Martin Stett. Special mention for editors Richard Chew and the legendary Walter Murch. So, Lindsay, what is this conversation about?
Harry Caul, surveillance expert extraordinaire, has been hired by a mysterious man known only as the director to spy on a young couple in a public square in San Francisco. At first, this is just a technical problem for Harry. How can he get the best and clearest recording using all the tools he has and all the men working for him? In fact, Harry prides himself on not getting involved. He's more interested in hearing what's being said than in listening to it. But as he extracts more and more meaning from the conversation he's recorded, and as he gets more and more involved with the organisation run by the director, he loses his professional distance, and the warning voices that spell danger for Harry start to get louder and louder. Gary, what's wrong with this picture?
I think the let's do with the most obvious thing. This is a character study / thriller where the main protagonist is a very taciturn, grumpy and uncharismatic middle-aged man in the most horrible Rain Mac that has ever been invented, and yet somehow he's one of the most compelling characters of 70s cinema, and it's extremely weird how Coppola managed to pull that off. It's a sort of masterpiece of screenwriting and directing, really.
Absolutely, and was ever a film so aptly named? This is a film quite literally about one conversation. Mm-hmm. We hear most of it right from the beginning, but more and more meaning is revealed to us as it's revealed to Harry as the film goes through. And in the first half of the film, and later on in the film actually, there's often not much dialogue outside of this conversation that we hear obsessively. Harry's listening to it obsessively, we are hearing it as the audience. And I think it's a very clever film in that the audience is as much in the dark as Harry. The viewer is as much in the dark as Harry until relatively late on. I think the other thing that's very clever about this film for me is right from the start, it's telling you everything you need to know. Yeah. But like Harry, we're too dumb to pick up on these clues.
Yeah, totally.
So the opening shot over the credits is an overhead shot, I guess a crane. It's not a helicopter, too early for a drone. I'm guessing a crane, a really high crane, over the top of Union Square in San Francisco. The camera goes further down, or kind of focuses further and further down to land on somebody in the square. Now, it's not the couple that Harry is obsessively following, it's Harry himself. Yeah. And so right from the start, this film is saying to us, Harry's a watcher as well as being the watched. Yeah, Harry's not just on the sidelines of this; he's kind of key to this.
And that whole thing of the audience being what is happening in the film, because that whole brilliant shot. It's again, maybe you need your second or third watch to realise it's a surveillance shot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are surveying, just as these unknown people are surveying Union Square. Yeah, we are surveying Union Square. Looking, watching, peeking.
Yeah. And there's, a character who's at the start, and doesn't really appear, he's not really a character, but he's a mime who's doing his mimey magic in this square. And he at the start, when we first see Harry at this close-up, just while the credits are still going, he's copying Harry. He's drinking Harry's cup of coffee with him, he's following him around. And then later on, he also follows the couple round, who are the subjects of this kind of surveillance that Harry's carrying out. And I kind of, I mean, what do you think he means? What does the mime signify?
Well, I guess the most obvious signifier is that Coppola was very honest right from when the film came out, that it was the film that inspired it most was Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up from 1966. And at one point in that film, the lead character, David Hemmings, is sort of taunted by a mime in a park.
Really?
Yeah. So it's his doff of the cap. He's kind of, I'm admitting that, this was probably the main inspiration behind this film. Blow Up's story is very similar. Instead, it works on photographs instead of it works on sound. A photographer photographs something and thinks it's a murder, So it's very much a remake of that, or a reimagining of that film. In terms of what it means, I other things it means, I mean, it's great, isn't it? Because there's a certain amount the conversation leaves up to the viewer. And while there is nothing later in the film to say that mime was surveying anybody, that doesn't mean he wasn't.
Oh, I mean, this is a film about you don't know who to trust and you don't know what to trust, and you can't always trust the evidence of your own ears or your own eyes.
Exactly.
And that is an incredible take. That is blown my tiny little mind, man. That has blown my mind. What a great
well,
take.
I mean, and there's nothing, there's nothing. I'm not saying, right, that was Coppola's intention. In fact, it was the mime all the time. I'm not saying that for 1 second. It's simply one of the many things a viewer could take from it.
Yeah.
Because there is never an answer given to exactly who is doing the key thing to Harry Caul.
Yeah.
Or if anybody is.
That's true. And we discussed, as we always discuss, do we talk about the ending? And we're going to talk about maybe the visuals of the ending without necessarily maybe...
We're going to try.
We're going to try to avoid the main mechanics of the story, if we can.
Yeah.
But, of what happens at the end.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Another thing I really like about this film is this dichotomy between Harry as a character and what he does. So he has no problem getting extremely close to other people. This is his job. He follows them. He spies on them. He listens to them. He knows things about them. He can find out things about them. And yet his own life is incredibly private and secret. So we see his flat. Excuse me. We see his flat. His apartment, and he's annoyed because his landlady has let herself in somehow. He's got this kind of barrage of locks on the door and an alarm system. Yeah. But his landlady has not only let herself in because she's figured out it's his birthday, because she's opened his birthday card. So even his mail isn't private from her prying eyes. Yeah. But aside from that kind of incursion, everything else in his life is incredibly private and secret. So he has a girlfriend who's Terry Garr, a character named Amy. She doesn't know the first thing about him. No. She doesn't know his job. She doesn't know what he does. She's never been to his apartment. He says, "Oh, it's my birthday," and he takes the wine that the landlady has left for him, and they share the wine. And she says, "Oh, how old are you?" And quick as a flash, he says 42. We already know from his birthday card it has said 44. I don't know who the birthday card's from. Who knows him that well? Maybe it's his mum or something. But he lies about something that is so trivial that cannot make any difference, and it's just his immediate instinct is to shroud things. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think obviously one of the smartest things about the film and the most philosophical, I guess, things about the film is that this is a man whose entire living is based around, as you say, getting as physically close to people as possible in order to overhear what they say, and often work with photographers who are getting as close as possible to take photographs of them at the same time. Yet he is absolutely alienated from other human beings. He is an essay in loneliness. He cannot connect with others at all. And that irony is through it. And also, it really hit me this time round watching it. This must be, I think, the 5th time I've seen it. It is a film I deeply love. But that, he has this reputation as, as someone puts it, the best bugger on the West Coast. And, the best at his job, and this brilliant man who is hired by all sorts of wealthy people. Yet his life is so squalid. He spent all the money on this huge underground space, which is his workspace. But he rents this terrible, squalid little flat, and his girlfriend's flat is equally squalid, and he sneaks in there at night, and he gets on the bed and doesn't take his clothes off, and everything about his life is squalid and small and kitchen sink. He goes everywhere on the bus. He doesn't seem to have bought himself a car. I mean, this is San Francisco, not New York, and it's just what are you spending your money on?
Yeah.
What is the point of this success that you've worked for?
And the kind of limits of his life are demonstrated when on his birthday, he doesn't see his girlfriend on his birthday, I think it's the next day, on his birthday, he sits alone in his flat playing jazz saxophone.
And even the saxophone, you said a little while ago, that actually towards the beginning of the film, once you've seen the film once, you realise that the whole beginning of the film is telling you everything that's going to happen. It's literally foreshadowing everything. And one of the things is, which I remember the first time I watched it was like, look, he plays jazz saxophone. He sits in his flat and plays jazz saxophone. That's a bit weird. And now it's kind of like, no, it's just an enormous Hitchcock-like MacGuffin, and we know where it's going to end up. And now we've got to try and do try and talk about the brilliance of the ending, because, like many people, I contend it's one of the best ever endings to a film. But we're going to try everything we can to not spoil the point of it. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll tell you the actualities without necessarily going into maybe the significance.
Yeah.
That is our aim. Let's see.
That is our aim.
We see if we can do it. But you're right, it's an incredibly symmetrical film. There is nothing that's mentioned at the start that is not kind of brought home to roost at the end. And it's an incredible accomplishment.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I love that. It's a completely symmetrical film. That is so great. And that reminds me of the fact that, one of the most extraordinary things about the film, because we're still on what's weird, is it runs almost in the making of this film, from soup to nuts, runs almost parallel with Watergate.
Yeah.
Not just after it, where, he was deliberately commenting on what the Nixon administration were doing. Parallel. It's bizarre. And I sort of wrote down this timeline. So it was written in the late 1960s as Nixon's first term began. It was shot in 1972, just as Nixon authorised the bugging of the Democrat HQ at the Watergate Hotel as part of his successful campaign for re-election. Nixon resigned in 1974, 4 months after the conversation was released in US cinemas. And Nixon finally admitted to TV interviewer David Frost that he authorised the bugging of Democrat HQ on May 1977. So in other words, Coppola may well, I'm sure people who were liberal and politically inclined were sitting around in places like Hollywood discussing what the Nixon administration may or may not be doing, because Nixon was so tight with Edgar Hoover, it seemed, from the outside, although I'm not sure that was strictly true as everybody thought. And that Hoover, everybody knew that he was bugging everybody that moved. He bugged the Black Panthers, he bugged John Lennon, So this paranoia that was sweeping America was well founded. The government was surveying people. It was invading the privacy of people. It was operating above the law. It was inventing the law itself. And that brings also to the point that the other main inspiration, which Coppola admitted to the film, apart from Antonioni's blow-up, was 1984.
Yeah.
And, it's because that was the fear, that by stealth, America was becoming a totalitarian regime in the style of George Orwell's Big Brother, and those huge corporate, was it Oceania and Eurasia or whatever it is?
Anastasia, yeah.
Anastasia, and he manages to evoke that creepiness so well.
Absolutely. Well, I can just say, here we are recording this in July 2024, and thank God those days are behind us.
Exactly.
And nothing like that could ever happen again.
That's right. So it feels so, it goes without saying, prescient.
Absolutely prescient. And so I think in a few of the films that we're discussing round about this time, actually, they were made 50 years ago, they were made 80 years ago, and yet 90 years ago. and yet they still have something to say to us today. And that's how you know a film is timeless. That's how you know a film is good, because actually it's saying something not just about its own time, but about people, but about humanity, but about politics. And the conversation is definitely one of those.
Yeah, and just on that point, that isn't just about it having a timeless message. This is about how brilliantly Coppola conceives a film where the clothes and the hair and everything in the set design and whatever is not predicated on being the early 1970s.
Yeah.
Therefore, the two films that is most often compared to, Antonioni's Blow Up, I'm afraid now it's a relic of the mid-60s. It's so bogged down in the swinging 60s and the London scene of that time that you could do, I think a lot of modern watchers would laugh at it.
And I think that extends to the casting as well, doesn't it? These kind of incredibly kind of the time actor and
David
actress.
Hemmings, Vanessa Redgrave, yeah.
Do they stand the test of time?
Not sure. And the other film it's compared to is Brian De Palma's Blowout, which was almost, I'm going to go one better than Frank, and I'm going to his mate Frank and rival, and I'm going to take Blow Up and cross the conversation with it and come out with something even better than both. And that film, some people say it's the last great film of the 70s, even though it came out in 1981. I'm afraid not for me. It's a film bogged down in 70s look and 70s styles and 70s camera angles and 70s bloody music, and all of it is just, I think, awful. Crass and laughable, as so many Brian De Palma things are, and what is a really tense and scary story in the conversation becomes a ludicrous melodrama in Blowout. So it isn't just this is a timeless kind of philosophical thing about humanity. He's managed to make a film that doesn't it looks like it could be made at any time.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, it's partly, I think, due to this long grey Caul.
Yeah,
Caul
it's inspired.
Raincoat.
What is
and it's just, I don't know if it's meant to be kind of every man or kind of the greyness of Harry's life. It could be any one of those. But what it does do is it covers up his clothes. So,
exactly.
Although he wears a suit, and suits of all things, are not necessarily kind of time specific.
No, they're not. Not this kind of suit. It's a perfectly quite nice, actually. When you do see a suit, it's a nice suit with a black tie in a Reservoir Dogs style.
Yeah.
So it's not rooted in the 70s. It's not wide lapels and bell bottoms. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. But what it enables him to do, it's kind of camouflage in a grey city centre, isn't it? He can flit in and out, and it's kind of amazing how little we know of him actually throughout the film. And generally in the course of a film, you'd start off not knowing much, and by the end you'd know more. The only reason we know more about Harry is partly kind of what happens to him and his reactions to it, but partly he has a dream sequence where he's talking to the woman in this couple that he's surveilling. And he's kind of telling her, and whether this is true or not, because this is a dream sequence, he's telling her about his childhood. He almost drowned. He was paralysed as a boy. We learn that his work previously has caused somebody to be hurt, or some people to be hurt. We don't hear very many kind of details about this. So what we're hearing about is his guilt, his unexpressed guilt. He's also a Catholic, which also helps. So he goes to confession, and he's not really confessing very much, because even his priest is not going to know that much about him. Even in the sanctity of the confessional, he's not going to be open because he's very paranoid. As it turns out, if you've seen the film, you'll know he ends up not being quite paranoid enough.
Yeah. Well, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not all out to get you. And I think that's almost the key
absolutely
thing of the film. Interestingly, on that level, because you brought up the dream sequence, which feels incredibly crucial, but that almost did not happen because nobody ever wrote a dream sequence. Basically, this film very famously was wedged right in between Coppola's Godfather, The Godfather, and The Godfather Part 2. And in an incredibly short space of time, it just his imperial phase, really. 3 masterpieces in 18 months or whatever. And so there was a shooting schedule for the Conversation, and it finished, and Coppola had to go and start on The Godfather 2, and he left the whole post-production to his legendary editor, Walter Murch, who he had worked on developing before. So he had a really clear idea of what the film was supposed to say. He got to that scene, which was actually just a conversation between Harry Caul and the Cindy Williams character, and it looked awful, and there was nothing he could do. He couldn't get the cast back to reshoot. So Walter Murch in post-production put some spooky music on it and created some mist and fog.
Really?
and made it look like it's a dream sequence.
Yeah. I would say it does stick out a little bit in the film. It's not quite as seamless as everything else. It feels a little bit of a cop-out in terms of this is how we get to know about Harry.
Yeah, a bit of exposition.
Exactly, in a film that kind of lacks it, and famously lacks it. And I've written here in my notes about the last thing about why it's weird is I said that we're as in the dark as Harry is. But if we're in the dark, it's our fault, because like Harry, we haven't been paying attention to the detail, to the nuance.
Yeah, brilliant.
And I think that's true for the whole film. And that dream sequence seems to me, it lacks a bit of nuance. It sticks out a little bit in the course of the film.
It does stick out, you're right, but I love it. And the Conversation probably, the more you watch it, and the more you watch it with a critical eye, I think the more you can pick out these little things that can be described as flaws. I was quite amazed watching it yesterday, which, for this podcast, seeing those flaws far more clearly than I'd ever seen them, and still thinking it's a perfect movie, and that they didn't take me out of it one bit. Sometimes something becomes so much a work of art as it is that the idea that it will be different is preposterous. It is what it is. And I love that dream sequence because although you get glimpses of Harry's vulnerability, it's the one time you see him as a man of arrested development, as a child, as the child he actually is. Okay, yeah, I'll buy that. Without going into attachment theory, that whatever has gone wrong with Harry, the reason he reacts to the world as he is he's not an adult. He's not really an adult, and in this dream sequence, you see the little boy talking almost to his mother. Yeah. And I love it for that. But while we're on the form, I think some of the shots are really interesting in it. So I've mentioned it starts with this kind of long shot from above. For the first half of the film, it's close up. It's close up central. It's close up on Harry's face as he's listening. It's close up on his hands as he's kind of twiddling knobs and dials and trying to get this recording to sound kind of perfect, trying to pull more kind of words from it, more noise, more conversation from it, whilst refusing to pull more meaning from what he's hearing. And so it's all about the close-up. But towards the end, there are many more kind of long shot. Harry's in long shot, Harry's in medium shot. And to me, this signifies it's out of his control. He's not the knob twiddler anymore. Yeah. He's not the one in charge. He's not the wizard behind the curtain anymore. He's very much kind of the focus of someone else's attention. And I think the form reflects that theme. Yeah, I really agree. That's a brilliant observation. And what it's made me think of is, there's a lot of favourite scenes, and most of them are not short shots. Some of them are very, quite long scenes. And the whole party back at his workspace scene is great in many ways. But strangely enough, my favourite bit of it is when there's this beautiful shot, because it's a big warehouse space, and a character called, what's her name? The middle-aged floozy. Yes. I don't know her name. I just called her the middle-aged floozy in my notes. The middle-aged floozy. We'll have to stick with that. Has been making a connection with him, and he has he's revealed something and then felt he's exposed himself too much, and he walks away from her, and the camera stays where it is, and they've been right. They were huddled together. Camera was right in their faces, and now it is miles away, and they are miles away. And even though it's probably 20 yards away from each other in a room, it looks like
it's either ends of the screen, isn't it?
Yeah. Very again, Coppola, massive fan of Antonioni, and it reminded me of kind of shots in things like L'Avventura, those kind of vistas of nothingness, you know, which, you know, accentuating the loneliness of the human soul, blah blah
exactly.
blah.
Because this warehouse, it's where he stores his equipment. It's kind of workshop, as you say, and it probably takes up maybe a 20th of this workshop, of this warehouse space, and the rest of it is just like columns and emptiness and concrete. And it's a really affecting conversation. I wish I had written down that woman's character name, but yeah, I did just call her middle-aged floozy. She seems determined to seduce Harry, and she does. But they have this conversation, and he's talking about, by this point, him and Terry Garr have split up. They only have one scene together, and she's so frustrated with him not telling her anything and being so suspicious. And they kind of split up. Is it his decision? Is it her decision? Don't know. But he's talking to the middle-aged floozy about Terry Garr, and he says, "No, what would happen if someone that you loved did this? Is there any way back to what we've had?" And she says, "Well, did she know? They're talking in third person. Did she know that he loved her?" And he just says to her, "Oh yeah, how would she know?" Because he's never said anything to Terry Garr about his feelings. How would she know? And it's a very kind of tender scene. Yeah. Immediately undercut by the fact, so this is after a kind of convention, a surveillance convention, where Harry has met Bernie Moran, who's like the second best bugger on either coast, who has a real kind of jealousy, real competitive streak with Harry. And unbeknownst to Harry, he gives Harry this kind of promotional pen, and it's a recording device. It's very kind of unsophisticated recording device, and Harry's been duped by this because he thinks this guy is such an idiot. He does not see any threat coming from him, and maybe he should. But this whole tender conversation has been recorded and is played back by Bernie for the amusement
Brilliant
of the people at this post-conference party in the warehouse, and it is a real humiliation. As
Absolutely, I have looked up. It's the character is Meredith, and the actress, who is very very good, is Elizabeth McRae. And while you're mentioning, is it Bernie Moran? I think I should mention, yes, William P. Bernie Moran, Alan Garfield. The actor is fantastic. It's the middle section of the film almost hinges more than anything else on the electric competition between Bernie Moran and Harry Caul, and what is an arm wrestle which suddenly swings very dramatically in Bernie's favour, and he brings a monstrousness to that character, a Rottweiler quality. Not Rottweiler, Pitbull. He's just snapping at him. You know, like compliments sound like punches in the face. You know, it's brilliant.
And he's very bitter in particular about something that Harry did. Harry was able to record a conversation in the middle of the sea, it sounds like. And whether this is the one that led to people being hurt before, we don't know. You say Pitbull. I think he's more like one of those little yappy dogs. And
maybe.
And Harry is like this big boxer or Doberman or something. But those little yappy dogs are the one who can kind of bite your ankle until you can't walk.
Bite your balls off.
Yeah, but if you're a big dog, like Harry, you look at this little dog and you see no threat. Yeah. But you should. There
you go. That's a really nice metaphor for it. And of course, you know, another beautiful piece of writing. Harry refuses to brag about what he does. To anyone, not just in this party, but you know, this guy is pushing him to brag, to tell how he pulled off this amazing things and blah blah blah. And finally, he pushes the button that makes him brag, and he brags. And 2-3 minutes later, he is utterly humiliated by the guy who's managed to push him into bragging. And it reinforces Harry Caul's view of the world. Yeah. If you soften a little bit, if you become yourself just a little bit, they will get you.
Yeah. If you allow yourself to be seduced by flattery or by a woman, by a floozy. If you open yourself up, danger, trouble comes in.
Exactly.
And sadly, he's proved
in every
right.
way. In every way, he goes. The whole film is about him going against his instincts and against his personal. I mean, I guess if you're a psychologist, you might say his life script or his self concept, but it's against his personal code of ethics. You know how he is as a professional, and he goes against it and against it, and the more against it he goes, the more he sinks and drowns.
Yeah.
And because he's hidden behind this for a long time, and it worked.
Yeah, and he says, you know, at the start, there's three key conversations. I'm going to quote here. I don't care what they're talking about. All I want is a nice fat recording. He says about his flat, I don't have anything personal. I think Terry Garr says to him, you know, what have you got that's personal? I don't have anything personal. And to Stan, played by John Cazale, his kind of assistant at the time, I don't know anything about human nature. I don't know anything about curiosity. You mentioned he's a child, and I wrote down here, he's like a baby. He can't read these human signals.
No.
And like a baby, he blunders into something through his misunderstanding. So these professional borders, this professional distance that he's lived by, it starts to break down because he starts to get involved in the couple that he's surveilling. He starts to he builds his own story around them. Is it true? Is it not? It doesn't matter. He builds his own story around them.
Yep.
And he gets involved in that story to his utter detriment.
Yeah. Before we start going into, I think, which we should, you know, what's great about this movie, because I know you're going to have more great scenes and more great lines of dialogue. I did want to mention, again, another parallel, the way this film parallels not just what was going on in America at the time, but what was going on in Hollywood at the time and what was going on in Coppola's life at the time, because this was the second film produced by something called the Directors Company. And the Directors Company was formed in 1972 by Coppola, Peter Bogdanovich, who had directed Last Picture Show and What's Up, Doc, and William Friedkin, who had produced who had directed The French Connection and was just about to direct The Exorcist. And it was this ultimate new Hollywood collective.
I mean, that sounds like quite the ego fest, I have to say.
Well,
sounds like...
Why do you think it didn't last long? The story is, and you know, to keep it short, is the whole idea of this is that they were signed to Paramount, and Paramount said they could make any film they want, any of the three of them, for $3 million. As long as they kept within the $3 million budget, that, you know, total control. And they could produce outside directors as long as they kept the budget under $1.5 million. It was this perfect deal which gave directors unprecedented freedom while giving them some security. And the three of them just utterly blew it. Basically, you know, Bogdanovich puts out Paper Moon. It's a success and a critical success. All in the Garden looks rosy. Coppola does The Conversation. Bogdanovich and Friedkin absolutely savage it. They just tell him it's shit. And they're here to make commercial films, and you've made a film that's an art movie. Why the fuck are we making art movies, basically? And then Bogdanovich went and made Daisy Miller, which Friedkin absolutely hated from the off, gave him no encouragement whatsoever, and of course was proved legendarily right. Meanwhile, Friedkin went and made The Exorcist and didn't make anything for the Directors Company at all. He just catcalled at everybody else's films. And the whole thing fell apart in 2 years.
Yeah. I think if you want to guarantee, if you're a studio and you want to guarantee that you're going to flush money down the toilet, give directors total control.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. You know, you want a tax write-off? There you go.
Yeah.
Give your new hot director total control. They'll get rid of the money for you.
See what happens.
In a blizzard of cocaine and ego.
Other bits I like, I mean, Hackman, first of all. Oh my giddy gosh, what a performance. What a performance. And I was looking at kind of other films that he's done. He's made like 80 films, and it really made me understand. I have not seen enough of Hackman's films. But I guess the ones I know best, I mean, French Connection, he won the Oscar for. I know you're not a kind of particular fan
I'm not.
that film. Unforgiven, he won the Oscar for supporting
Absolutely brilliant.
acting Oscar for Little Bill in that. Immense.
Immense.
And the performance in Unforgiven and the performance in, and you'd expect that they're 20 years apart, but the performance, I mean, they're so separate. They're so different. And it's just a measure, I think, of the extent of his talent. But his performance in this is note perfect, beat
really
perfect.
is.
He does not miss anything, and you absolutely buy him as this figure.
And this completely internalized man. You know, this was, you know, his, I don't know, rivals or competitors. I don't know, rivals, competitors, were they? But, you know, Pacino, De Niro, Jack Nicholson, you know, the other, Harvey Keitel, the other big actors who were emerging, Martin Sheen, they were all going big. It's all big and loud and extrovert and shooting people and screaming at people and
say hello to my little friend.
And say, you know, ends up in say hello to my little friend. Ooh-ha. And Hackman in this film as Harry Caul creates a character on a par, not quite as great for me, but close to as Travis Bickle, doing a completely internalized performance, quietly imploding for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's what he does.
Yeah.
It's hardly able to make eye contact with another human being. It's absolutely mercurial.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of my favourite scenes as well, you know, it gives... I love the way Coppola does this of like, right, you know, this is the 70s and there's lots of guns and violence and tough guy action is starting to really... It's just around the corner. And, Gene Hackman decides to stomp back to this director's, you know, corporation building and like, I'm going to stomp up there and see what's happening and if anybody gets in my way. And there's, you know, two security guys there and he tries to swing a punch and they end up carrying him out like a child. He's got no fighting skill. He's not coming there with a gun. Sorry, everybody. No, he can't suddenly do karate, punch people out, you know, or whatever. No, he's just a bloke and he's got no chance against one halfway big guy. This is not, you know, fantasy world. It's not Hollywood fantasy world. Yeah,
absolutely. I wrote something down about the faceless organisation run by the director. So this is his nominal client, the director. And I mean, I imagine it as with a capital D because it is a job title. Played by Robert Duvall, who has a big dog, actually, later on we do see. But, I mean, not given a name, not given really much of a backstory.
Nope.
It's kind of...
Two short scenes where you barely see him.
Exactly. He's kind of... He holds the key to the plot, but not in terms of like his character. Or
he's the Wizard of Oz, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking, director, Coppola as director shows us what he wants us to see, which doesn't really hold up in the film because actually the director is not perhaps as much of an active agent as you think he's going to be. But is there something there about the director?
I do. I think again, this is a little bit. You can direct onto that Robert Duvall character what you fancy, depending on your own, what's the word? You know, I don't know, preconceptions or paranoias or whatever. I think of him as Hoover. You know, I do.
I think.
But now, you know, you're watching it now, and I'm thinking of him as like the precursor to Elon Musk or. You know, all these nameless plutocrats.
I think that's a really good call, actually, because when he goes to the office, so he's meant to be dropping off the recordings, and something seems a bit hinky to Harry, and so he doesn't drop off the recordings, and this leads to kind of everything else that happens afterwards. But when he goes to the office, it's like, is this a commercial company? Is this some kind of government company, government department? We don't really know. And it reminded me a bit, actually, visually, of Bertolucci's The Conformist, not in terms of scale, but in terms of that kind of blankness.
The look.
Is this just an office that's been hired? Is this not really a real office?
100% agree. When he walks up to that office block, and there's no one around. It's just this dystopia and these angles. And I too thought, oh my God, that's The Conformist. That he's just pinched that look. And yeah, you're right. It's all so corporate. It's all so anonymous. What do you think about Harrison Ford's performance?
I mean, he's a baby. He's like a little baby in it, isn't he? But I mean, this is pre-Star Wars, so it's pre his big break for sure. I think it's really interesting. I'm trying not to give too much away, but is he a person you can trust? His performance, I think, is very slippery, and you're left.
So. I love it.
I do as well. I do as well. When I'm saying it's baby, I don't mean he doesn't bring it. I think he does bring it, but he brings something that we're not used to seeing from Harrison Ford.
Definitely,
which is a slippery untrustworthiness
and a threat.
Yeah.
And he doesn't do much.
But that threat is not a violent threat. It's a kind of "you're nothing to me" kind of threat.
Yeah,
I'll do what I want.
Yeah.
And he doesn't say that, and he never says anything threatening. He exudes this, "you're not important in this."
Yeah. And also, time is on my side. I don't have to get a gun out and point it at your head. I don't have to order security to come and beat you up. I don't have to do any of those things. Time is on my side, Mr. Caul. So, and that, one of the key things towards the end of the film, and of course we're going to try not to, is a phone call that he makes. And to this day, I don't know whether what he said had any basis in truth at all. But he knew it would work on Harry Caul.
Yeah. I was thinking about the name Caul. Obviously, it's Caul in the script, Caul. Obviously, it's like kind of phone call, hear a phone call, I guess, hear a call.
Yeah.
But more to me, so Caul, Caul. Do you know what that means? Do you know what that word means?
No, and I should have looked it up. Go for it.
It's so it's kind of when a baby is born, if part of the amniotic sac sticks to its head or something like this.
Right.
Often, it's easy enough to remove from the baby's head, but babies are born with a caul. But in olden times, when a baby was born with a caul, that baby was assumed to be clairvoyant. That baby was assumed to be able to tell the future. And I just wonder if that, I mean, I'm maybe just putting that on it, but I wonder if that has anything to do with it, that this belief that Harry knows what's going to happen, but actually he doesn't.
I think there's definitely a thing with Coppola, which is sort of like from his generation, which was sort of, I don't know whether copied from Wells and Hitchcock, but certainly, that they were, the idea that once you get into his films, once you get into him and decide that he's the man, or even that one of their films is the man, you start to go down the road of absolutely everything in his films. Every tiny thing has some absolutely huge meaning. And you really see directors these days really subconsciously doing, Ari Aster and, kind of Zack Snyder, and they're just planting so many things in their films. Edgar Wright, for people to obsess over in the future, in the hope that people will do exactly that. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think the biggest compliment I could pay to the conversation is, with all of these ideas around it of what it may or may not mean, I never think with any of them, that was an accident.
Yeah,
no, I never do. I mean, that probably some of them were, but I never just think, no, I'll dismiss that out of hand. It's because it's so brilliantly written and so brilliantly shot and so brilliantly designed.
But that's the great thing about films, isn't it? And that's the great thing about you and I talking about them, actually. I mean, it's great for us. Don't know if it's great for anybody else, but it's great for us. Is that films give you that space to put yourself in it, to put your own meaning. I mean, film studies has only been a kind of thing since the late 70s, but it's all about put in what you like, because it can mean what it can mean to you what you want it to mean.
Yeah. And that thing of, go and look up every interview that the director did about it. But firstly, take what you want out of those, because guess what? They might not have been telling the truth. Yeah.
Can I talk a bit about John Cazale? Because I'm just conscious of time. We've been on this.
Yeah, no.
So John Cazale plays his assistant Stan, and he has a bit of a falling out for him and eventually goes to work for Bernie Moran. But this is one of only 5 films that John Cazale was in. He got his start in the theatre, and he did lots and lots of theatre, but he only was in 5 films. They appeared over kind of 6 or 7 years. So he was in The Godfather, he was in The Conversation, he was in The Godfather Part 2, he was in Dog Day Afternoon, and he was in Deer Hunter.
It's unbelievable.
Each-
5 masterpieces.
Each of which was nominated as Best Picture.
It's incredible.
For the Oscars that year. And I think this one possibly, in terms of Cazal's role, is maybe the least of the 5.
It's the slightest. Yeah.
We don't get to see his absolute pathos, which he can totally bring. He's so amazing in The Deer Hunter, Dog Day Afternoon, and as Fredo in the Godfathers. Yeah. He died of lung cancer at early age. He was, I think, 42 or something. He was already dying when he was filming The Deer Hunter, and he died before it was released.
Right.
He couldn't afford to get insurance for the film, but Robert De Niro paid for it. It said he's got to be in the film.
Wow.
And so he was. His close friend and frequent collaborator, Israel Horovitz, a writer, I guess, wrote a eulogy. And in it he said, "John Cazal happens once in a lifetime. He was an invention, a small perfection. It's no wonder his friends feel such anger upon waking from their sleep to discover that Cazal sleeps on with kings and councillors, with Booth and Keane and Jimmy Dean, with Bernhardt, Guthrie and Dews, with Stanislavski, with Groucho, Benny and Allen. He will make fast friends in his new place. He's easy to love."
Wow. That's some tribute. Blimey.
It's lovely, isn't it? Really lovely. I liked it a lot.
And he and Meryl Streep married?
No, but they were long-term partners. And she was with him when they met in a play when they were doing theatre together.
Right.
And they kind of stayed together until the end of his death. Let's move back to the conversation, because we need to come to the end of this shortly, and I'm not saying we should end it now, like I'm normally suggesting in inverted commas.
We should.
We should talk about it. We should talk about the ending. So
yes.
Things have gone wrong for Harry. What he's overheard is not what he thinks he's overheard, and it hinges on the very slight inflection in a phrase. The whole film hinges upon what this phrase means. Harry hears it one way, feel it means one thing. Actually, at the end, when we hear it again, we hear it in a different way, and we realise it means something different. And you were saying that they were two actual...
Yes.
The two different recordings. It's not it's not just one recording that you can hear both ways. It is two different versions that we hear, but are meant to be one version in the film.
Exactly. This is another thing about the whole thing of Coppola having to go, and Murch being left with the post-production. And there had been, with Frederick Forrest, who plays the character Mark, he had read the line 4 different ways, I think it was, and Murch made his choice. And then when he shows Coppola his final cut, Coppola was not convinced, but Murch kind of said, "Yeah, no." Plus, Francis, we don't have much time. We've got to get this to the studio, and Coppola was convinced and went for it. I think, and again, we're trying to talk about this without spoiling, but I thought it was a brilliant choice by Murch, because we're not supposed to hear that line the same way. We're supposed to be in the head of Harry Caul, hearing what he wants to hear from the position of a man who is not mentally well.
Yeah, and that brings us right to the end, where the end scene is. I think we can talk about what happens in the end scene. Do you think?
You think? Well, yeah, because what we're trying to stay away from is the big plot point. But the way the film looks at the end, I think we can do.
Yeah. So basically, Harry has come to realise that things are not what he seems, and his previously impregnable life, he realises that, he has not been paranoid enough. And so he starts to go to the paranoid nth degree in his apartment.
Yeah, and where that goes is this extraordinary montage of a man ripping his life to the ground and
trying to find a bug.
And I think what really hit me this time round is there is a final shot. It's quite wonderful. Gene Hackman is sitting on a box, I think it might be playing that goddamn saxophone. And the camera swings from one end of his now destroyed room to the other end of his now destroyed room and kind of back again. And it's a really wonderful, slow-moving camera that kind of just reveals slowly what on earth he's done to his room and symbolically his life. And the one thing I noticed this time round, because I was looking more closely in the first time, is, we've had this montage where at some points he's going up to, for instance, I don't know how symbolic it was, but, a little statue of the Virgin Mary that he had, and he smashes that to bits to try and find the bug inside, and it isn't in there. But so he's doing this thing of ripping apart tiny little things, thinking there's a bug in there. And I realised that the camera pans around, and one of the first things it shows is a perfectly intact lamp.
Mm.
And it's kind of like, so for the first time this time, it sort of made me think, no, this guy's nuts.
Yeah.
That if there was any obvious place where there's a bug hid, it's there. It's a bloody lamp.
And a perfectly intact telephone.
And a perfectly intact telephone.
Where he has one last conversation. It's I mentioned the symmetry. He starts off, there's been an incursion into his apartment by his landlady, and at the end he's trying to find the later incursion. So again, everything that's in the first half of the film means something in the second half of the film.
Yep.
And it's just I feel like we could talk about it all day. I've got some things I haven't said, but it's just such an amazing film, such an amazing performance, such an amazing kind of distillation of its time, such an amazing throw forward, if that's the word, to the future and where we're living now. And where you say something you say something to your friend about, I must pop into Iceland for some fish fingers, and then Amazon's trying to sell you the rough guide to Iceland. It's just that surveillance is all around us, and we have accepted it. We have absolutely accepted it.
And it's just happened gradually, and we've not put up a fight, and because it's all been very convenient. Our lives are more convenient, apparently.
Yeah.
Or are they? Got to ask you one last question.
Go on then.
Here's a theory. The bug's in the saxophone.
I think the bug's in the telephone.
Does at one point take the receiver apart?
Yes, but there's, if I'm talking about a film being symmetrical, there's a scene earlier on at the surveillance conference, which is about how you bug a telephone.
There is, isn't there? We didn't even talk about the conference,
which
is a work of genius in itself.
It's an absolute work of genius.
Wow. Okay.
Do you know what? Watch the film.
Yeah.
See for yourself.
And then write to us a few essays about all the things that it means, because it's, there really are entire podcasts, documentaries, short films, whatever, dedicated to just all the possible meanings of the conversation. And I guess one of its great things is it's a thriller which is done in an slow art house manner, shouldn't be rewatchable. Like, it should be one of those eat your greens movies.
Yeah.
You watch it once, you say, oh well, I've watched the conversation, good for me. It's watchable over and over and over again. So little happens in it, and it's so fucking entertaining. Every small thing that happens in it seems cataclysmic. Absolutely.
It's a very spare film, and this is why there's so much commentary about it. This is why we're able to have such a long conversation about the conversation. It's a very spare film. There is lots of room for us to put in our own stuff.
Exactly.
And there will be lots of room for you to put in your own stuff. If you haven't seen it, please do watch it.
So how many, what's our favourite bug? How many bugged telephones would you like to give a conversation? For weirdness and for quality.
Yeah, for weirdness, I'm going to say 9. For quality, it's 10.
I think for weirdness, for me, it's 7. For quality, it's 10. I think the fact that it's a bit lower down on weirdness, I think, is basically on the fact that I've watched it, and its logic is so powerful now that I don't find it weird anymore.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Oh, maybe we shouldn't have done it for the podcast after all, but we did.
I am delighted that we did.
Me too. As always, it's lovely having a conversation with you. Till next time.
Till next time. What's Wrong with This Picture is brought to you by Lindsay McCulloch and Gary Mulholland and is recorded by Russ Keffert at Audio Egg. Music composed and performed by Russ Keffert.